There's a moment where your life quietly splits in two. One version of you keeps doing what feels safe and stays exactly where you are, telling yourself that eventually things will change. The other version makes a different decision, one that doesn't feel dramatic at first, but slowly begins to shift everything around them. The strange part is that most people don't even realize when that moment happens. There's no announcement, no clear signal, no big turning point. They just wake up years later in a life they didn't consciously choose, wondering how they got there. And when you trace it back, it all comes down to one decision. Picture two people, same age, same city, same income, same starting point. They graduate around the same time, get similar jobs, and begin building what looks like a stable adult life. From the outside, there is no meaningful difference between them. They live in similar apartments, spend their weekends in similar ways, take similar trips, and enjoy the same small upgrades that come with finally earning their own money. If you saw them in the first year, you would assume they are on identical paths, and that's exactly what makes this so deceptive, because the decision that changes everything rarely looks like a big, life-altering moment. It doesn't feel like rich versus poor or success versus failure. It feels small, almost invisible, like just another normal choice. But over time, those small choices begin to compound, and what once looked identical slowly turns into two completely different lives. At first, their lives looked exactly the same, but within a few years, the gap between them becomes impossible to ignore. So what actually changed? One of them started treating every paycheck as permission. Money came in, and almost immediately it was allocated toward improving their current lifestyle. A slightly nicer car, better clothes, more frequent dining out, upgrades that felt justified because technically they could afford them. Nothing extreme, nothing reckless, just small increases that felt reasonable at each step. The other person made a quieter decision. Before life had a chance to claim the money, they set a portion aside. Not because they were more disciplined or more intelligent, but because they approached money differently. They didn't see income as something that should immediately be consumed, but as something that needed to be directed. From the outside, the difference still wasn't obvious. Both were living well, both were functioning, both appeared fine. And that's why most people misunderstand this stage completely. They assume the difference is discipline, that one person is simply better at controlling themselves, but that's not really what's happening here. The difference is not about restraint, it's about sequence, it's about what happens first. And when you look at that sequence closely, you start to see a much bigger problem that most people fall into without even noticing. That problem is living paycheck to paycheck, and it's not limited to people who are struggling financially. It shows up just as often in people who are earning more than they ever expected to, because earning more money doesn't automatically create freedom. In many cases, it simply gives your lifestyle more room to expand. As income increases, so do expectations. Rent becomes more expensive, not because it has to, but because it feels like a natural upgrade. Cars get nicer, subscriptions stack up, daily habits become more costly, and over time, the new level of income becomes the new baseline. What used to feel like progress starts to feel normal, and what used to feel expensive starts to feel justified. This is why so many people feel stuck even when they're doing well, and this is where most people lose the game. They're earning more, but they're not gaining space, they're not gaining flexibility, and that feeling is not just psychological, it's structural. In the United States, household debt has reached nearly $19 trillion, with over $13 trillion tied up in mortgages and more than $1 trillion in credit card balances. That's not just a statistic. It reflects how normal it has become to build a life that depends on continuous income just to sustain itself. At some point, the American dream quietly shifts from ownership to obligation. Instead of building a life that supports you, you end up maintaining a life that depends on you. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people don't have a money problem. They have a decision problem. So even if your income grows, why does it still feel like nothing is really changing? Because the real decision isn't about how much you spend. It's about what happens the moment money enters your life. Specifically, Who gets paid first? If your lifestyle gets paid first, everything else becomes optional. Saving becomes something you do if there is something left. Investing becomes something you consider later. And most of the time, later never comes. But if your future gets paid first, everything changes. You remove the need to rely on discipline because the decision has already been made. You're no longer reacting to money, you're directing it. This is where habits quietly take over. As explained in Atomic Habits by James Clear, real change doesn't come from big, dramatic actions, but from small behaviors repeated consistently over time. When saving and investing become part of your system, not something you have to think about, consistency stops being a struggle. You don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. And over time, those habits compound just like money does. This is a subtle shift, but it's incredibly powerful. Because once that structure is in place, your behavior naturally follows. You stop asking yourself whether you should invest and start assuming that you will. And that shift alone creates a completely different trajectory over time. And once you start to recognize this pattern, you begin to see it everywhere. There's nothing complicated about this, and that's exactly why most people overlook it. There's no hack, no shortcut, no system that makes this instantly exciting. In fact, it's the opposite. It's repetitive, predictable, and honestly a bit boring. If it were me, I'd keep it extremely simple. Every time I get paid, a fixed percentage moves out immediately, not after expenses, not after I see how the month goes, but right away. Even if it's just 10%, even if it feels small, that's where everything starts. You get paid on Friday, and by Monday, that 10% is already gone, not spent, moved out of your account into something that starts working for you. I'd automate it so there's no decision involved, no emotional interference, no negotiation with myself. And then I build my lifestyle around what remains. That's the part people don't like because it forces a constraint. But that constraint is what creates long-term flexibility. It's what separates temporary comfort from actual freedom. The reality is the things that work financially are rarely impressive in the moment. They don't look good on social media, they don't feel exciting, and they don't create immediate visible results. But over time, they create something much more valuable than excitement. They create stability and eventually optionality. This is also where a more stoic approach comes in, not in a complicated philosophical way, but in a very practical sense. It's about acting based on what you know is right, not on what you feel in the moment. It's choosing consistency over impulse. It's understanding that just because you want something now doesn't mean you should act on it. We are emotional by nature, and money is one of the areas where emotion does the most damage. That urge to spend, the fear of missing out, the need to reward yourself, it's all normal. A stoic approach doesn't try to eliminate that, it just doesn't let it take control. And that's where automation becomes powerful. Because instead of relying on willpower every month, you remove the decision altogether. You don't have to be disciplined every day. You just have to set the system once. And this is where time starts to amplify everything. If you go back to those two people, the difference between them didn't start big. It started small, almost invisible, but time doesn't stay neutral. It magnifies whatever system you give it. One person continues to feel increasing pressure because their lifestyle grows with their income. The other begins to feel increasing relief because their money is working independently of their effort. Over enough years, that difference becomes dramatic. One life is constrained, the other is flexible, one is reactive, the other is intentional. And the hardest part is that this isn't just theory. I know people like this. People who, no matter how much they earn, always find a way to spend even more. And in the end, what grows isn't wealth, it's debt, pressure, and that constant feeling of running but never getting anywhere. It's a silent cycle, but an exhausting one. Warren Buffett once said that time is the friend of the wonderful and the enemy of the mediocre. And in this context, that idea becomes very real. Time doesn't create the outcome. It simply accelerates whatever direction you've already chosen. And the craziest part is that it all started with something that felt completely insignificant. Most people are not held back by a lack of opportunity. They're shaped by small decisions repeated consistently over time. One path feels better now, the other becomes better later, and the direction of your life depends on which one you keep choosing. Most people will hear this, agree with it, and still do nothing. If you don't want that to be you, click the video on screen, Why Rich People Try to Look Poor, because once you understand how wealth is actually built, you start to see why the people who truly have it move very differently from the people trying to look like they do. Do the boring stuff, think long term, it works.